Hey guys, it's Liv here, bringing you guys another video. Today I want to discuss why I think rain will be terrible in Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. So if you guys enjoy, of course, leave a like below, and if you learned something, let me know down below. And subscribe if you're new, and with that said, let's just get right into it. So, I decided I was going to do a moveset guide, but I felt like that I wanted to cover this because I realized that no one really has talked about a lot of like the archetypes that have gotten really good in this gen and how bad they will be in the remakes. So I wanted to discuss that, and I want to start with Rain, because I felt like Rain is always one that's either very dominant or very terrible in the meta, and it's never really in between. Either everyone's using Rain or no one's using Rain. There's no in between. So there are a lot of reasons though why I think that Rain will be terrible in the coming games. Now I do want to preface this by looking over, first things first, we do need to actually cover what Pokemon are in the Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl decks. So going off of history, we can actually start with the Ruby and Sapphire and Emerald decks. So as you can see, this is the amount of Pokemon that were in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. It's 202. And if we compare that to Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, there are 211. So besides the Pokemon that got extra evolutions, there are practically nothing added to these games in terms of Pokemon count. Like as you can see, for example, if we scroll a bit up, you can see that there are a couple new Pokemon, like Magnezone, for example, is in the game, but there really aren't that many that got added, like Probopass, but it's quite literally just extensions of the Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald decks. So if we look at the Platinum Pokedex, we see there are 210 Pokemon total if we scroll through. There are no Sunsetters in this entire dex. There are no Sand Rush or Slush Rush Pokemon, so the only weather that has any merit here is Rain. Now to be fair, no one usually runs Sand unless it's with Excadrill, so Sand isn't really an archetype, it's just Drill with T-Tar, or Drill with Hippo. Technically you can mark it as one, but you don't do a full team dedicated to your Sand Sweeper. You do a team dedicated to Drill and T-Tar. Which, I mean, I guess you could argue is that, but in general, you don't do a full Sand team like the way you do Rain, which is like a full several Rain Sweepers on your team. And then Hail, I mean, no one really runs Hail unless it's RU or NU, but even still. So if we look at Slush Rush Pokemon, I do need to set this back to National Dex really quick to cover this point. But if we look through Slush Rush, as you can see, all of these Pokemon that are in the Dex right now, none of them are even in the generation. So already, Slush Rush is out. Sand Rush, we go to Sand Rush, none of these Pokemon are in the games either. It's Pokemon like Excadrill, for example. And then it's stuff, real quick, I'll turn off my face cam. You can see Dracozolt, Lycanroc, Sandslash. None of these Pokemon are in the decks either. And then if we go to Drought, for example, as you can see, none of these setters are in, like literally none of them are. Even if you go to Groudon, it's not in the game. None of those Pokemon are even in the decks. So Drought is just completely out. Even Torkoal didn't have Drought before. Completely out. Same as Politoed is also completely out. So you don't even have like anything manuals for Sun though. There are, to be fair, I guess a couple Sun Sweepers, if I remember correctly, in these games, but overall, nothing worth running manual Sun over. So Rain is really the only archetype you have. And if we look at the Rain Pokemon, obviously, for one, everyone's gonna first jump to Kingdra. If we're going off of regional decks only, and seeing that Sword and Shield did not have a national dex, then there is no Kingdra in this dex. That is a huge thing that is going to lose Rain. So these Pokemon on your screen right now are the only Rain setter, along with the 4 only Rain Sweepers besides NFE Pokemon. So obviously, you could technically run Pelipper, Mantine, and go with Water Flying Spam. However, you're kind of asking to lose to Electric types, because one of the best things that Rain had for it was the addition of things like Seismitoad, Mega Swampert. They could just be Electric immunities at the very least, because in tandem with something like a Pelipper, you could kill the grasses for that. So overall, Rain will be suffering significantly against Electric type Pokemon. You could technically run a Seaking with Lightning Rod. However, Seaking 1 just isn't that great. I mean, if you look at Seaking stats, it's 68 speed, 65 in defense, and 80 in Spidef. Like, this isn't really bulky for a Pokemon you're going to switch in, especially not an Electric type, which could still definitely just pivot out on you. Most of them are capable of having pivot, especially with U-Turn or Baton Pass. So even if you take out Baton Pass, because of the fact that OU typically bans it, a lot of Electric types do still have U-Turn. So it's still not really going to be that reliable, and I don't know if you'd really want to throw a Seaking on an OU team with how many threatening Pokemon, even just with Pokemon in the returning Sinnoh decks. I mean, it just doesn't seem justifiable. Then obviously Floatzel, I mean, Floatzel really isn't going to pass either. It seems like a kind of playstyle you could maybe work in the U sort of setting in DPP remakes, however, I don't really see it working. On the flip side though, quite literally because of Flip Turn being a move, I felt like I was funny there. But on the flip side, if, let's say, DPP has the full 493, let's say, well, then we have a bit of a very interesting discussion here. Obviously, the title was probably something like why I think Rain will be bad without National Dex. So now we're going to get into what I think will happen to Rain if we do have National Dex, because that should change things significantly. For one, the Rain Center will probably still be Pelipper. We'll start off with Pelipper, of course, because Pelipper is the easy place to start. Then from there, we clearly bring on Kingdra, which Kingdra's had a ton of buffs for it. For one, obviously, you can see the fact that Kingdra currently right now does not show Flip Turn in this moveset, but Flip Turn was added in the newer gen games, which does help Kingdra significantly. Same as moves like Liquidation, of course, getting slightly higher base power, and also the Fence Drop potentially, helps Kingdra significantly, basically as your physical Rain Sweeper, and for good merit, of course. So, next up, of course, a few other Pokemon that we do need to go over on Rain. Obviously, with Kingdra, you now have a justifiable Rain Sweeper, but what would be the other teammates for Rain? Well, if we look at the format, one very, very obvious teammate would probably be something like a Bronzong. I don't know why I scrolled down for it, but Bronzong would be a phenomenal Rain partner. For one, it's a solid rocker, and two, you can obviously patch the fire weakness with the Rain. So in general, this would have really just weaknesses to like what, Ghost and Dark that you would really need to worry about, which you could definitely pair other Pokemon to handle those on this team. So that would already be pretty good. Another Pokemon that I think would actually be a pretty low-key threatening Pokemon on Rain in sort of an OU format would probably actually be Polywrath. Now, Polywrath I think actually might have some merit in OU Rain for a couple big reasons. For one, if you look at Pelipper and Kingdra, a couple things that the Rain Core currently does struggle with would probably be electric types, and then to an extent grasses, though Kingdra and Pelipper both can handle those, especially with Pelipper getting Hurricane and Kingdra getting Hurricane as well. So with the killing of grass types for Rain, you're able to just run a lot more reliably through teams with Polywrath, especially now that it has moves like Drain Punch, for example, to actually damage teams. So Polywrath could be pretty cool, and you could also even just throw it in as a Water Absorb Pokemon, potentially. However, I don't know if I would necessarily do that, because you're not going to really take on Hurricane from Kingdra. So again, while this is definitely a sleeper pick for Rain, I don't think it's necessarily going to break through anything. It does help a lot with potential other setters, such as Tyranitar, for example, because Tyranitar would obviously be able to probably take a hit from Kingdra, especially with the Sand Up. So that would help you pretty well in the T-Tar matchup, which does mean that you will, in the end, keep your Sand Up more reliably, especially because you don't need to worry about Pelipper taking a Stone Edge or something. So I do actually like the potential Polywrath in this team, especially if you were to go with Bronzong as your steal. I think it could actually be pretty useful. So currently with this team, we do miss one thing right now, which is definitely a good ground type. So what ground type would we put on this? So if we pull up the National Dex right here, as you can see, none of the OU ground types really would work here. Because Flygon, for example, would obviously have to worry about taking just a lot of hits. It's neutral to water, but you're still going to get destroyed by any good Ice Beam, or even just a good Rain-boosted water type attack. Gliscor obviously has to worry about water attacks. A lot of these Pokemon all do. If we look at UU Pokemon, for example, none of these really like Rain either. So I think that the water type of choice here would probably be either a Gastrodon or a Torterra. I think ideally, if I was to run Rain, I would personally probably go with Torterra. While you do still obviously have to worry about ice attacks, at the very least, Torterra could run something like a Yache Berry set and go for a Wood Hammer on any sort of water types. Or if you're worried about Rain specifically, you could go with Gastrodon. That way then you have a really good Rain Sponge there. You would probably just want to throw on a really, really good killer for grass types, because even though Kingdra and Pelipper can do it, you're still going to definitely be struggling a bit more at that point. Something else you could do definitely in this sort of Rain team is ditch Polywrath at that point if you're going with Gastrodon. And then go for something else, again, to kill grasses a bit more reliably that could still handle T-Tar. Because Gastrodon could still definitely do it for sure, but it's just a bit more passive against T-Tar's ult, especially if it was to get a Toxic off, or just anything in the opponent's team was to get a Toxic off. So, at that point, what would you get? What would you get as your Pokemon that can handle grasses and could also still handle T-Tar? Well, you do have a few options, actually. Weirdly enough, one that would fit the bill perfectly there, even though I would highly recommend against it, would be Infernape. However, you could definitely make an Endeavor lead set handle T-Tar and also grasses pretty well, and still obviously make sure that you had a way to damage Pokemon if Rain was up. I would still not recommend going this route. I think there are actually better options in this format. For example, the Pokemon basically needs to be a fighting type. So if we pull up our fighting type board, this also needs to be now something that will handle grasses. So as we can see, Infernape is off the board, but what about a Heracross? Heracross would also actually fit this build pretty well, and you could still actually run this as a lead with, let's say, a Spikes, for example. You can go with a Gut set as well, now that Guts is, of course, an ability. Well, Guts actually was an ability in this. You can go with the Moxie set, though, technically. Regardless, though, Heracross is a pretty solid speed, especially for a Pokemon that's not going to be Swift Swimming. But Heracross in general could actually be a pretty good option. One thing you would need to worry about at this point, though, if we look at the current OU metagame in a National Dex hypothetical format, would be how do you handle Gyarados? Because Gyarados is the one Pokemon right now that would run through your team. For example, it's going to boost the water attacks, which would definitely hurt a lot of your team. And while you might be saying to yourself Gastron is an option, that could easily just destroy you with Power Up. So you do need to think of something for Gyarados in this sort of hypothetical. If you were to run a Gyarados counter at this point, I think you do have a couple options. One, Rotom-Mow I think would actually be a really strong option here, with Rotom-Mow being able to also handle ground types and water types for you, especially the water ground types. Really phenomenal option there. Stuff like Gastron, of course, would no longer be a really good threat to your team. I think that personally, Rotom-Mow or just Zapdos would be the Pokemon I recommend here. I'd probably lean a bit more towards Zapdos because you could still Hurricane spam a lot of teams, and that should still pressure Gastron a bit, especially with Guts Hera. Between the two of those, you should be fine. So I think that this would ideally be what the Rain team of the future looks like for Diamond and Pearl remakes. Now, obviously, I totally get that the Heracross pick does seem a bit weird, but I do personally like it a lot. Obviously, with Zapdos, you are a bit more able to handle everything besides the T-Tar that I mentioned, so you could definitely sub this out for some other fighting types. Something like Breloom, for example, could totally work here, which would help a bit more with waters, at least as a resist, whereas Zapdos would not necessarily be a resist. And with Toxic Orb, that would still definitely work for sure. You could also definitely go with a Roserade, for example, if you want a Spike Stack. That would still be able to probably do a bit of damage to T-Tar. However, again, you're starting to just not do as much damage at that point by not going for a physical option because of T-Tar's monstrous Spit F. So I'd personally probably actually go with Heracross, believe it or not. Lucario is actually a pretty good option too, just as a really strong fairy killer. Could help a bit with Kingdra against any sort of really Spit F fairies, especially after Rain is gone if you can't keep it up. But I do still, again, like the Heracross option. With Guts, you'll still be able to break any sort of fairies, because what fairies they're switching it on a Guts booster Facade. So yeah. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like below. I'm going to leave a link to just a rough version of this team of what I would personally run in a hypothetical Nat Dex format. As I said, I think it's going to be completely unviable without National Dex. So without at least the 493 that we had in the regular DPP games, I do think you're going to be really struggling to actually even make Rain possible, let alone viable. With this as well, if let's say DPP remakes were to just go off of what Sword and Shield plus DPP games had, this would still actually be a very possible team, because you can run all these Pokemon on the current games actually, believe it or not, for Sword and Shield. So you can definitely still actually make this work if you really needed to, if that was the case. So as long as they had at the very least a Sword and Shield and BDSP mixed Dex format for BDSP, you would actually still be able to run this team perfectly fine. So hopefully you guys enjoy this, and with that said, I will see you guys in tomorrow's video. Peace out, guys.